and welcome to another episode of Half Court Press. He's Wilson Moore. I'm Jon Walker. We're here to talk basketball. As always, Wilson. We've got a pretty packed episode today. Season's right around the corner.
We made it.
It feels like forever.
It was a long, dark 6 months.
We were sitting here in June saying
trying to come up with
right around the corner.
But we mean it this time.
And we actually mean it now. So hello and welcome into this episode of Half Court Press. We're recording this on Wednesday, October 30th. So consider this your trick or treat.
Yeah.
We'll find out after the next 30 minutes or so.
I almost had a thing of like, will Nebraska and Creighton seasons be a trick or a treat this year? Underdeveloped,
That's okay.
If I had tried to workshop it before we started doing this, could have come up with something clever. But
you would have gotten a rise out of me if you had dropped that.
Yeah,
maybe save it for a little bit.
Yeah.
Before we dive into everything, though, how are you, Wilson?
I'm doing well.
That's good.
Yeah. Finally, when we'll get to this, covered an exhibition back in PBA. It felt natural. It felt right to be back there, and feels good that college basketball is
same thing.
It is almost upon us.
Yeah, it feels pretty damn good.
Yeah,
it really does. Nebraska had an exhibition against Grand Valley State. Creighton had an exhibition against Purdue. A little bit different vibes, I'm sure.
Vibes.
But nonetheless, it was our first taste of basketball for the year. I think the Grand Valley one in Nebraska was on Sunday, right? Or was that on Saturday?
That's right. Yeah, it was on Sunday.
It was on Sunday. So let's start with Creighton because that one was on Saturday night. A top 15 matchup between two top 15 preseason teams. A matchup that we were a game away from having in the Elite Eight last year, and it looked a lot different 7 months later. It sure did. But Creighton beats Purdue 93-87 in a game that the Jays showed a lot, answered a good amount, and learned even more. Notably, Pop Isaacs was the marquee of that night, I would say. Looked electric, really, kind of commanded, ignited, whatever adverb you want to use. That's what, or verb at that is what Pop Isaacs did for Creighton's offense. Finished 10 of 14, 4 of 6 from 3, dropped the team high 24 points. Lobs to Ryan Kalkbrenner, drained contested threes, created his own shot at the rim. Really everything Creighton needed to see, they saw in Pop Isaacs. Because the fact of the matter is, he was brought in to replace the scoring of Trey Alexander. Yeah. Really good shot creator in his own right. It'll look different with Pop Isaacs. But more importantly, what we found out in Saturday's Purdue exhibition, I keep wanting to call it a scrimmage for some reason. I mean,
Isn't it kind of? Are they?
I know they're probably not glorified scrimmages.
Aren't they kind of at their core? Aren't they the same thing? That's a game that doesn't count in the standings. I think you should be able to use both.
Yeah. But either way, whatever you want to call it, however you want to look at it, whatever type of importance you want to designate to it, Creighton learned that Pop Isaacs can fill it up. Pop Isaacs can score. So that's what you wanted to see. The other thing was Ryan Kalkbrenner dominating a Purdue front court in the infancy of life without Zach Edey.
Yeah.
And he did that. That's what you're supposed to do as the preseason Big East Player of the Year, period. A 3-time Big East Defensive Player of the Year against 2 underclassmen. So that was really positive. And I think everyone knows that Creighton is going to and has to feed Ryan Kalkbrenner this year. He will be a staple of this team. Duh. So it was just good to see that he can dominate a matchup that he's supposed to. Looked a little bit different, looked a little more natural. Footwork was a little bit smoother, and he did some different things than what he did last year. He had a really good seal in the second half. That was just like, oh, wow. Okay. The exact thing, again, that you'd want to see from a senior, super senior at that, working against an underclassman. Did you catch any of it, Wilson?
I didn't. I read your coverage.
That's lovely.
But yeah, that was Saturday. I'm trying to remember what I was doing that Saturday. Was I watching the World Series? Is that on that night?
No, maybe. I don't know, dude. I've been quick baseball tangent, real quick. I've been checked out. I'm a Yankees fan. I'm the worst. I understand. But after the way Game 1 unfolded, I really mentally checked out for Games 2 and 3.
You are the worst. Like, as someone who I've never seen my team in even the ALCS.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Disgusted.
I'm sorry. So thankfully they didn't get swept. Neither did Creighton because they played one game against Purdue. But yeah, man, the thing that Greg McDermott said after the game is the obvious importance of having a preseason exhibition, regardless of who that is against, but especially when you're playing a preseason top 15 team. I think the preseason favorite to win the Big Ten.
Yeah.
Again.
Yeah.
When you're playing that caliber of a team in a preseason exhibition, you want to get exposed. Yeah. And that's what Greg McDermott preached after the game. And that's certainly what Creighton was at different points on Saturday. Specifically on defense. Yeah. They gave up 83 in the closed exhibition at Iowa State, gave up 87 to Purdue. And gave up 31 to Braden Smith and another 17 to Fletcher Lawyer. You've obviously seen them have heaters like that, but Pop Isaacs knew it. Greg McDermott knew it. This team's going to have to defend at some point. Pop Isaacs said, quote, I think we'll be fine scoring the ball, but eventually we're going to have to guard somebody.
Yeah.
And that's exactly right. Greg McDermott didn't seem concerned about it. He said nobody's defense is where you want it to be this time of year, which is true. But it looks like this team, at least early on, we'll see if that changes, but at least right now, I think this team is much farther ahead offensively than it is defensively. And that really comes back to Stephen Ashworth and Pop Isaacs. That's a big part of why Braden Smith had 31 and Fletcher Lawyer had 17, but also on the wing. That was supposed to be Jason Green. He struggled a little bit offensively, so it was hard to keep him on the floor. And then they started to rotate a little bit, and Mason Miller, Isaac Trout, Jackson McAndrew, some of those guys aren't as defensive prominent, if you will, as Jason Green is. So it was just interesting. Somebody's gonna have to step up on both ends when it comes to the wing position, especially defensively. So that's kind of what Creighton wanted out of this. That's what they got.
Yeah. Now, one thing I was going to ask you is, there might be a little more to glean from that, playing a Purdue than playing a Grand Valley State. So with that in mind, do you feel did you or the people around you learn anything from that game? Whether it's what Pop Isaacs can do, like, okay, this guy showing flashes like he can be the kind of scorer Trey Alexander was last year. What do you think we learned from that?
Yeah, I really think that was the thing. Now we saw I'll say this, it's so unfair to judge Pop on last season because he played most of it with a torn labrum in his hip. I tore a labrum in my shoulder and can confirm that you can still function. It hurts.
How did you do that?
Wrestling my freshman year of high school.
Nice.
Kid from Eureka, Missouri. I was actually just telling this story like less than 48 hours ago, so that's nuts that this came up. I was his only loss that year because injury disqualification.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so he won state. I was his only loss. So
you beat the state champ.
Who's the real winner? So I can confirm that a torn labrum, at least in your shoulder, does not feel good. I could imagine walking on one, sprinting on one, playing basketball on one in your hip. Also does not feel really good. But at times last year, what did I say? Pop finished 10-14. There were games where he finished 2-14. So that's kind of what we need to see. It was really, really, really good to see in his debut that Pop Isaacs can get hot, can create his own offense, can create offense for others. I mentioned the lobs to Ryan Kalkbrenner. But can he do that every game? How often, how consistent can he do that? That'll be the question that we in Creighton obviously probably hope to have answered by the time the Players Era Festival, Nebraska rolls around right around then, a few weeks into the season. But for now, that's what you learned is Pop Isaacs came in, or that was the biggest takeaway anyway. There was a lot from the exhibition, obviously. But Pop Isaacs was brought in with however much NIL money that was, right? Creighton didn't have to spend a lot of NIL in the portal this year, or at least not spread it out because they only had to go get 2 people. They got Fedor too, but in the portal, they only had to go get 2 people, and that was somebody to replace prospectively Trey Alexander, or people to replace Trey Alexander and Baylor Shireman. So whatever they gave Pop Isaacs, it was to come here and replace that scoring that they lost in Alexander. And so to see him do that in his debut was exactly what you wanted to see. And I'm sure exactly how Pop wanted to play.
Yeah.
So yeah. Nebraska was a little bit different. They kind of blew out Grand Valley State in the second half, but that first half was really interesting. Yeah. We talked about these being for getting exposed. How was Nebraska exposed?
Well, they saw pressure defense for the first time in the preseason. I think a thing that a lot of people maybe aren't super clear on is Grand Valley State's a good team.
They are.
They're not Purdue, obviously. They're
shout
not
out D2.
Yeah. This is a team with a very good D2 team, a lot of former D1 guys on this team. So it's not like when Nebraska played Doane in the preseason last year. They won that game by 40, as they should have. And it was you're watching Doane warm up, and you're like, I don't know if anyone on this team is taller than 6'5".
I'm not.
Me either.
Good for us.
Yeah.
We could play there.
Yeah.
I don't know.
We could not. To anyone taking that literally, we most definitely could not.
No.
But
I write about it for a reason.
But no, so I think that's an important distinction, that this wasn't just, obviously Nebraska was expected to win the game by 20, as they did, but this wasn't some, invite, last year, invite the local small college and just kind of beat up on them. They expected a greater challenge from Grand Valley State, which is what they got. They, like I mentioned, the pressure defense, that was a big kind of...
You're usually not going to see that in a preseason exhibition.
No.
Not typically.
No. But that's what we saw. I think we can get into kind of takeaways, what I learned from that. Raleigh Wooster, a true point guard that they didn't have last year. He was huge for handling that pressure. Just I've made this metaphor before, but when I covered Indiana men's and women's basketball, the thing I always felt about Grace Berger, forget if I came up with this or if someone told me, but it stuck in my mind that Grace Berger was the adult in the room. She was the one. Yeah. She was the source of stability. Sure. She made sure nothing got too off the rails, and that was how I felt about Raleigh Wooster. He was the adult in the room. When they were up, they didn't have their best offensive half in the first half, and they come out first possession. Jawan Gary walls up as fantastic, just on-ball defense, forces an awkward fall away mid-range jumper, late shot clock. Yeah. Ball kind of skitters around under the basket. Raleigh comes away with it, gets credited with a steal, pushes the pace, sets up Bryce Williams for a 3 in transition. Next time down, Wooster attacks the basket, beats his man, gets into the paint, finishes at the rim. Few minutes after that, gets a 2-on-1, and that's one of those that a veteran point guard just puts that in his back pocket. You get a 2-on-1 with a point guard who has played as much basketball as Raleigh Wooster. That's a layup for the trailer on that, And so that was my big takeaway.
On that note, real quick, we didn't see that. Casey had the ball in his hands quite a bit last year, rightfully so.
Yeah.
Never really at any point were teams on their toes waiting for Casey to blow by them.
Right. No.
When you have two true point guards, Raleigh, Ulis, who can do that, how does that change Nebraska's offense?
I think it makes them a little more balanced. I think, and I'll get to this too, that was another thing. Nebraska was 6 for 24 or something like that from three. And of those 6 threes, Gavin Griffiths had 4. So, shooting could still be a question. And this is a team that, that to succeed has to take and make a lot of 3-pointers. Correct. That's what they run that kind of, that's Fred's style, kind of space and pace. Yeah. That's why you bring in Connor Essegian. That's why you bring in Gavin Griffiths. Yeah. And there will be nights, I'm sure, that both of those guys are feeling it, and Nebraska makes it rain from deep. And but I think maybe just on paper, this is a little more of a slashing team than it was last year. The shooting's there.
I would say so.
But I think just you can't understate what Casey brought that team, which was like, there's a great shooter, and there's you have to be in the dude's jersey, and that was Casey. It wasn't just that he was a great shooter; it's he could get it off with
it doesn't
the
matter.
Tiniest amount of space. So you had to be way up and that open, and that's not just something you get every year, even with guys that are good shooters like Griffiths and Essegian. So it might be, a little more. But again, to your point, they didn't have a Raleigh Wooster or an Aaron Ulis who was as aggressive attacking the basket.
A year ago, it would have been Bryson Jawan.
Yeah, really. Jamarcus Lawrence.
Josiah, I'm sure, attacked the basket some, but he was playing on the block primarily.
So. He's more, kind of they run a set for him where he gets it at the mid post with momentum and
two-hand dunk and the whistle and the crowd. That's the Josiah Alec. That's the special.
Yeah, but to that point, I thought we saw a Nebraska offense that just isn't quite there yet.
Sure.
And that's that's why they schedule the way they do in the early season.
Yeah. And
I think that you kind of have to do when you have a team with as many transfers as Nebraska has and generally has going into most seasons. There are a lot of newcomers on this team, and that doesn't just, that chemistry doesn't just happen overnight. So I think there are times you could kind of see what they were supposed to look like in there. You could see there were possessions that you're that is what it's supposed to look like. Right. That is what they're going for. And, presumably you will see more of those as they play more games together and develop.
Absolutely.
So I felt like there was you could see the skeleton of a good offense in there, but it's not quite there yet. That was my big takeaway. That defense, I thought they played pretty well. Fred Hoiberg thought they played pretty well, even in the early going when Grand Valley State was hitting some pretty tough shots. Yeah. But offense just not quite there yet, and you can see what they want it to look like when they get further in that progression.
Yeah, it's interesting because Creighton didn't bring in a bunch of transfers this offseason, but 6 of the 13 scholarship players are all new to the program, be it transfers or freshmen. Yeah. And Greg McDermott scheduled somewhat similarly early on.
Yeah.
For the first 3 weeks.
You better get this figured out in the first 3 weeks because
there is no Grand Valley State awaiting Creighton past Thanksgiving week.
Yeah.
In the fact of the matter is Nebraska has a couple of those.
Yeah.
Some teams on there that might not even be as good as Grand Valley State, right? Which, is a credit either way, however you want to dish it. But that's interesting that Fred Hoiberg does that too. They did it last year, obviously, kind of the non-con schedule-wise. And they did it again this year because you have to establish some sort of a rhythm.
Yeah.
before you actually start playing meaningful games.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is it worked last year.
Right.
Nebraska won all the games they were supposed to win.
If we're going to play in an uber competitive, uber tough Big Ten, we better have some wins to show for it.
Exactly.
November, December, early January, whatever that is.
So it's interesting. I know we've talked about scheduling on this podcast before, but it's interesting because it leaves very little room for error. If Nebraska had shown up last season and laid an egg against South Carolina State, that is a pretty major blemish on a resume.
They don't make the tournament.
Yeah.
Probably. I don't know.
They made it pretty comfortably.
Yeah, that's true.
I remember my prediction last season was Nebraska will not know its status going into. Nebraska will be nervous on Selection Sunday, which that's good or bad. My prediction was they will not be comfortably in, but they'll be.
They won't be comfortably out either.
Yeah. And I was wrong about that prediction. They were very comfortably in the field by the time Selection Sunday rolled around.
Yeah. Let's talk about that because we're a week from the season now, less than a week from the season. I mean, you're merely days, and the Creighton season starts 2 days later.
Yeah.
Against the same opponent.
Yeah.
So that's fun.
Yeah.
But these teams have floors, and they certainly have ceilings.
Yeah.
Let's talk about them.
Let's do it.
When you step back and look at this team, what is the floor for this year's Nebraska? I don't know if you've put out a mailbag or a prediction or anything yet.
I haven't.
But what do you think is the floor for this team?
The floor?
Let's start there. Let's be a Debbie Downer first.
Yeah. I think, the floor is missing the tournament.
Sure.
I would say because, and that would be disappointing to Nebraska. Fred Hoiberg said it 15 minutes after the season ended. He said it can't be another 10 years between tournament appearances like it was because, so I think the floor is just, if we're looking at the, everything goes wrong situation, and that's barring injuries,
sure.
Weird stuff like that. Those happen. You can't account for those, but barring those, I think the worst case scenario is we never see any progression beyond what we saw against Grand Valley State. The offense never quite gets on the same page. It never flows like it does. Gavin Griffiths and Connor Esijan both aren't able to handle the floor spacing roles that is expected of them. Yeah, because I'll get to this in the best case scenario, but I think those two guys are going to go a really long ways in determining Nebraska's ceiling. And I just think that worst case scenario is that there aren't enough scorers. Bryce Williams has to do too much, I think he's going to be their leading scorer this year, but you need the guys behind him, and not enough guys step up, and it puts too much on his shoulders, and just that they didn't that they get pushed around like they did at times last year. That the muscle they added in Braxton Mia and Andrew Morgan isn't enough, and they still lose under the basket to those more physical, bigger Big Ten teams.
Sure. I think the floor for Creighton is really similar.
Yeah.
It's a little different, but it's somewhat similar because of so many new pieces.
Yeah.
But I still think the floor for Creighton is the NCAA tournament.
Yeah.
I don't see them finishing any worse than. And again, we're talking about worst case scenario.
Yeah.
I don't see them finishing any worse than 5th in the Big East.
Yeah.
That gets you into the tournament.
Yeah.
So I still think the floor for this group is getting to the tournament, which is a pretty damn good floor to have.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think what if Pop Isaacs isn't consistent? We don't know. What if Pop Isaacs isn't consistent? What if they just don't have the dudes to match up defensively in an ultra competitive, always tough Big East? What is this a team that's going to score 100 but give up 100? Probably not. Again, it's not November yet, but these are all the questions that could lead to the floor. And maybe a first round exit for the first time, and I don't even remember. But that's kind of what I think the floor is for this team, which says a lot about we're assuming there's no injuries. Says a lot about Ryan Kalkbrenner. Says a lot about the nucleus that they returned in guys like Fred King and Jason Green, Isaac Trout, Mason Miller, Ashworth, Sterling Knox. Like, sure, half the roster's new, but the people who came back, they've been here and they've played. And maybe Sterling Knox is the exception because he redshirted last year. But I think that's kind of the floor for Creighton. I really do. I don't see. Somebody asked me this, and I don't see a scenario in which they don't get to the tournament. I just don't.
Yeah.
I think the non-con schedule is built in a way where they have those 4 games, bye games at that, before they play Nebraska. Then they'll play Nebraska in front of a home crowd, what should be. I know there's probably a decent amount of red that gets in.
Yeah, I mean, I guess neither of us have covered a Creighton-Nebraska game at CHI.
No, so I'd imagine a little bit of red gets in, though, but it'll be a mostly home crowd. And then the rest of it is just like, not that you'd want to, but they're games that you can afford to lose.
Yeah.
Whether people want to lose them or not, they're games that you can afford to lose. If you go to the Players Era Festival and lose to Texas A&M, nobody's going to bat an eye. They're going to say, A&M's good.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to be like, oh, Creighton, panicking. So, and then obviously pretty much every game in the Big East is like that too. So, no, I think the floor for this team is getting back to the NCAA tournament for the 5th consecutive year.
Yeah.
Which leads me into, if we were Debbie Downers,
yeah,
let's step into the sun a little bit.
We owe it to the
what's the ceiling
fans
for this
of
Nebraska
these programs that we're doing this for.
I guess.
What's the ceiling for these Huskers? If they're tuning in and we made them listen to everything that can go wrong,
we appreciate you.
If you made it to this point in the podcast, you've earned it.
Correct.
Yeah. I think Nebraska's best case scenario. I think there are a few things that stick out in my mind, as I kind of alluded to. I think if Gavin Griffiths and Connor Essegian both shoot like 38% from 3, like that is some guys who can stretch and bend a defense,
Absolutely.
And if they're doing that, that's
what they were brought here for.
Yeah, exactly. And like Griffiths was a top 100 recruit coming out of high school. Essegian was excellent as a freshman at Wisconsin. If they both play to that point, then like that's a lot for defenses to have to deal with, while also accounting for Bryce Williams and Juwan Gary and Andrew Morgan and Berkday Buchtenschel.
Yeah.
So I think they're big keys in it. I think Bryce Williams, if you're looking at the scenario where everything goes right, I think he's all Big Ten, in that scenario where he leads the team in scoring and gets is one of the better players offensively in the Big Ten, really two-way, because he's a solid on-ball defender. I think I guess a lot of this is just the opposite of what I said for
sure
thing, but
which makes sense.
Yeah, but Braxton Mia I think is quietly a big piece of things. If he comes in and averages like 6 and 10, like that.
That'll get it done.
Yeah, that would get it done, and and is able to match up with the Big Ten's not quite the doesn't have the star centers it did.
Sure.
A couple. There was a time 2 years ago. If you're coming to the Big Ten, you're going up against Edey, Trace Jackson Davis, Hunter Dickinson.
Yeah.
Those guys aren't.
Good luck.
Yeah. There's not quite that level of dominance down low this year, but just that just if Mia can help them not get pushed around.
Absolutely.
I think about Rutgers doesn't have Cliff Amori anymore, but Bama does. Yes, you will see Cliff Amori this year. I won't. But
That's going to be fun.
yeah.
Great.
But I think back to that like Rutgers game last year. That was probably Rink Mass' worst game of the season,
and against a big
Amori just kind of swallowed him up. Yeah, which is funny because he played great against Edie, but that's not the point. The point is if Braxton Mia can come in and help in those situations, and the gritty, grimy, ugly games like that. That's kind of what he's built for. Physical, like if he can help them beat those kinds of teams, the Illinois who they lost to in the Big Ten tournaments, the Texas A&Ms who eliminated them from the NCAA tournament, that's big. So with all that in mind, I think the ceiling, second weekend of the NCAA tournament.
Sure.
If everything breaks right and they're playing their best ball in March, because I see, look, if you are the Nebraska Cornhuskers men's basketball program, a NCAA tournament win is a wild success, obviously.
Correct.
That's
correct.
And you also figure if they win one game, all bets are off, right? Like, so.
Oh, if you win a game in March, who knows what happens?
Yeah.
Next.
So that's what I'm saying. I think, the dream season for this Nebraska team is, unprecedented since they've never done this before.
Only power conference school.
Yes.
To never do it.
That's right. Yeah. So second weekend of the NCAA tournament is what I'm going for best case scenario.
Yeah, and it just seems like there's a little bit. There's a lot of luck involved around that time of year in the draw, in the way the tournament plays out, in the way you get matched up with schools.
If you're just, some teams are just playing their best ball at that point.
Some teams are the 2015 Royals, the 2014 Royals, literally in the sense that, we played okay, good enough to get into the tournament all season, but then we win a really scrappy first round game. And that clicks for everything, and they get going. We've seen that before, but it seems like if this Nebraska team in particular got to the second weekend, they'd be outmatched a little personnel wise against the teams. I should say you typically expect to be in the second weekend. Yeah, what I think Creighton got like Princeton in the second. If Nebraska gets Princeton, the Huskers have a good chance.
You're talking 2023
Yeah.
there? Yeah, because that was the Princeton team that beat Missouri.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, there's a little bit of luck involved.
Yeah.
But it feels like if this team was able to do that, win a tournament game, win a second one at that, and then get to the second weekend, that would kind of be where it ends.
Yeah.
Just personnel-wise
is
what it feels like. The ceiling for Creighton is a Final Four.
Is it Final Four?
It's a Final Four. I mean, that is what Creighton has been chasing and will be chasing until it kicks down that door. You don't return Ryan Kalkbrenner. You don't go get Pop Isaacs. You don't sign Greg McDermott to a long-term extension, another extension, I should say, for him to not get to the Final Four, for them to not get to the Final Four. This is how the program's operated, expectation-wise. This is how, outside looking in, everybody's wanted it. The fan base has wanted it, and they've been capable. They were oh so close. You could say a phantom foul call away in 2023 from getting to the Final Four, or at least forcing overtime and against San Diego State and rolling the dice and see what happens. But that's the ceiling for this team, is a Final Four. I don't think anybody's shying away from that. I think everyone knows that. And to do that, Ryan Kalkbrenner has to play. And this is where it starts and ends, really. Yeah. Ryan Kalkbrenner has to play like a top 5 player, national player of the year candidate, because that's what he should be. On both ends of the floor this season, more than any other in his career, he should be one of the most impactful post players in the country. We've seen that on one end, and he's obviously been dominant at times on the other. But can he be so dominant on both ends so consistently in, one, a hellish non-con schedule, two, against some of the best centers in the country in the Big East. So it starts and ends there, really. And then, kind of like you did, the opposite of the things that I said for the floor. Can Pop Isaacs be consistent? I don't really have any reservations on this team being able to stretch the floor. Yeah. Like, this is Creighton. This is Greg McDermott's system. They're going to shoot it. Sometimes I have on nights. Sometimes I have off nights. It's just the way it is when you kind of have that system in place, when you have that kind of style about you. But I think if this team plays well, plays how it's constructed, this is maybe the key to the ceiling, is this team has a lot of pieces. And not just like, oh man, he's going to be so good next year. There aren't really a lot of people on that roster who are being stashed.
Yeah.
In part because that's not how college basketball works nowadays, and in part because this roster is pretty good. So will Greg McDermott use the depth? That's what I'm interested in. And how does he use the depth if that's what ends up happening? If they play 9 deep, who's the 7, 8, 9? Yeah. Those are the important things that I think will help this team reach its ceiling. But that's where it starts and ends, is with Ryan Kalkbrenner.
Yeah.
I think a quick look around the country and every preseason award watch list would tell you why. Yeah. Either way, floor or ceiling, the journey there or not there, I guess, will start next week, Wilson.
Yeah.
It'll be in PBA.
Yep.
It'll be in CHI Health Center.
Sure will.
Which leads us into the last thing I think we're going to talk about today. Game day atmospheres. Creighton released, this is inspired because Creighton released its promotional schedule for all the home games, or the ones that'll have promos. They released that, what is today? Wednesday morning. This week's a blur.
Yeah.
I'm ready for next week. So they released the promo schedule. Notably, it'll be a blue out for the Nebraska game. It'll be a stripe out for Kansas. They'll have a holidays with the Jays. That'll be cool. Powder blue on New Year's Eve when St. John's comes to town.
I like it.
So that'll be fun. The usual pink out is against Seton Hall late January. And then here's the one that inspired this whole thing, Wilson, is Fan Appreciation Night is February 11th against UConn. So that's $1 beer night. Celebrate. Rejoice. But it also has listed that it is the Power Stripe Out, which seemingly is different than the Kansas Stripe Out, which leads you to ask, what is the power? I think is what you asked me. What is a Power Stripe Out? And I had a little bit of knowledge on this, but not enough, that the Creighton fan base at one point in time, before certain things were done and said, loved Kanye. Why? Because, as I've discovered, during the starting lineups, they would play Power over the speakers. And I guess it would just get the people going. It's provocative. No, it would get the people going. And then Kanye did things, Kanye said things, and they took it away. Probably the right move.
Yeah.
People are curious and hopeful that Power Stripe Out means that for that night, at least,
Kanye West will be in the building.
when UConn's in town as a assumed top 5 team, and it's a top 15 matchup at the worst in Omaha on a Wednesday night, that they're going to bring back Power. So, with that being said, what is your favorite game day tradition, aspect, you name it, at Pinnacle Bank Arena? if it's a promo that they do every year,
That's a good
if
question.
it's you mentioned the hype video before
Yeah.
we started recording, that it's, kind of improved.
I thought this year, we only got a glimpse of it. I've seen it once at the exhibition. I thought this year's hype video was better than last year's hype video. And it's got a little more, a little more edge to it, a little more gravitas. Like last year, they shot it like on a playground, had that kind of fun vibe of like,
and let the kids play. We're here to ball.
But you know what? I think, they're coming off a tournament win this year.
Damn right they are.
A tournament appearance this year.
Damn right they are.
So it kind of feels like the hype video should, kind of reflect that a little more of an edge to it, which I thought. And, I assume like last year, evolve over the year as there are more things they can like put on it. But
barricade dunk, you name it, a Connor celebration, insert whatever clip.
I am something of a hype video enthusiast.
Okay.
Like,
I respect it.
When I like go on the road, I always like watching, what that arena's hype video when I covered when I was in Indiana. I can tell you of Indiana men, Indiana women, and Purdue men, all of which I covered. Indiana women had the best hype video of those three.
I don't think that surprises me.
Yeah.
Indiana women's basketball is pretty big.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I thought they brought it. In terms of tradition at PBA, that's tough.
I like I'll give you a second to think on it.
All right. Yeah.
So I like I'll pick one of these. Promotional schedule, UConn aside, pink out aside. I'm a colossal fan of the powder blue uniforms and the powder blue out and the way the arena looks that night. And so you factor in that's going to be on New Year's Eve with Rick Pitino in the building. Hopefully there's no snow on the ground for him to, as he said, jump in and get frostbite and die.
Yeah.
I think that'll be a pretty juiced day. I do. And so I was a big fan of the powder blue out last year. I was really eager to see which game was going to have it this year. And then you throw in the fact that, again, it's St. John's and Rick Pitino on New Year's Eve. It's going to be a ball.
Yeah.
No pun intended. Maybe there was. I don't know. But PBA tradition, I love when they do this thing that's kind of, you've seen it a little bit at Nebraska football games with the squirrel on the screen where it's like, hey. Yeah. They kind of do something similar during pregame. Whole place is blue, the lights or whatever, and they do something similar. And I don't know if it's just the speakers are so loud or maybe they've never responded to it, but here's a secret. I don't know if Creighton's fan base really gets all that jazz for that.
Yeah.
And they should. I think it's pretty cool. But maybe I haven't seen that place and it's at its full ferocity.
Yeah.
Because they haven't played Kanye.
Yeah. This is a kind of disconnected thought to all of that.
We're about at that point in the episode.
Yeah. When teams do pregame introductions, you know what I love? And Nebraska doesn't have a guy who does this, which is just a little disappointing to me. The guy, they come through.
Exactly.
They come through like the wall of people high five, and then there's one person at the end who has like an individual handshake.
Right.
I love that that's another one. Like when I was
guy.
Yeah, like when I was when I was covering Indiana and Purdue, I could tell you who each team's handshake guy was and like what they did with each player. Good. Nebraska doesn't have one of those, which Creighton
does. Sammy Osmani.
Yeah, Nebraska doesn't, and it feels like they have like some good personalities for it. Like Sam Hoiberg would be a really good he's got the right like personality and enthusiasm for that kind of thing.
The fan favorite, like that dude in one way or another is usually a fan favorite.
Yeah.
They appreciate, they like that they are the handshake guy. Yeah. And Sam Hoiberg's already got a little bit of that to him, obviously.
Yeah.
So
That's like,
what better option?
Yeah, I think that's a unique thing to college basketball, that they're like those.
Oh, for
like,
sure.
I like my other theory. Like every college basketball, specifically like the walk-ons, the guys at the end of the bench, you need one. Every team needs one guy who will whip the towel after like a big, and one guy who holds the bench back. Like, you need those two guys at the end of the bench. That
Yeah, you sure do. You really do. Get it swinging a little bit. Get somebody makes a three, they're the first person to pop off the bench and do. So, Baylor's celebration last year was he kiss his fingers and hold up three. Like, you need a guy on the end of the bench who knows, one, all the handshakes, and two, all the sellies.
Yeah.
So that when Baylor hits one, they're the first guy out of their seat. Kiss the fingers, throw them up,
And I think with that guy, you need the guy who, for some reason, even though no one has ever actually needed to do this, the guy who jumps up in the defensive stance and puts his arms out as if he's like making sure no one rushes onto the floor.
Yeah.
That
Marquette has one of those. His name's Shaka Smart.
Well, he does it
Creighton
during
fans will
games.
appreciate that. Yeah. Creighton fans will appreciate that. Marquette fans, probably not so much, but that's okay. This isn't a Marquette podcast.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah. We've got a couple of stories coming out this weekend.
We do.
And I wanted to give you the floor, of course,
thank you.
to kind of tee yours up and give whatever kind of sneak peek or promo you would like to for that.
Yeah, it's a feature on Braxton Mia. I talked to a lot of people in his life. His mom, his AAU coach, kind of members of his second family, I'll say. That's a little teaser there. But Braxton Mia has a very interesting story. He is a very interesting guy. And read all about it Monday morning in the Omaha World-Herald.
Sam.
And believe you also have a larger project.
I do. On yours real quick, though. Sam, I was in here bugging Sam the day that he had just finished reading your draft. And, he was kind of giving me the gist of the story. And I was like, there's no way. Like, what a windy road to Lincoln, Nebraska.
Yeah.
And Braxton Mia has navigated it.
Yeah,
So that'll be really good. I'm looking forward to that coming out. I have one on the hometown hero, if you will. One Millard North grad, Jason Green. It's really good. I've been working on it for a while. This is a behind the scenes look. I don't think you get that a lot in journalism. I had some audio issues where I did an interview and the file was corrupted. And so I had to redo the interview. So when this long story comes out this weekend, people are going to have like absolutely no clue. Like I said, usually you don't get the behind the scenes in journalism. The story comes out and you're, cool, the story's out. But I've been pretty stressed, pretty panicked at times over this story because I care so much about telling it.
Yeah.
And I don't have to tee up what Jason Green means in this area, means to Creighton. But he has put in a lot of work, and this will be the promo I give for it. He has put in a lot of work, and that's nothing new. He previously dedicated over 4,000 hours to basketball over a 2-year period. And when we talked to him for the first media availability of this preseason, he said this was the summer he put the most work in ever. And so how does the hometown hero looking to crack the starting lineup in his third year, how does he possibly put more work in when he's already put so much in? Pick up Sunday's copy of the World-Herald.
Yeah.
Anything else, Wilson? Any parting words?
Let's go.
Let's ball. Let the kids play. Let's ball. And let's wrap this up. Yeah. That's going to do it for this week's episode of Half Court Press. Thanks for tuning in. Next time we talk to you guys, we will have some real live action in-game basketball.
Imagine that.
To talk about, and it'll be a doozy and a dandy. Yeah. Thanks for joining today's episode. Make sure to follow all season long Wilson stuff, my stuff, Everyone else is at omaha.com. Thanks. We'll talk next time.